Hi, my name's Pete Nelson and I'm from Docker Brewery. We're based in West Hythe, just next to our sourdough bakery. We've been brewing beer since 2016. And we started off at the Harbour Arm in Folkestone in a shipping container, and we've slowly built up from then to now be a 10-barrel brewery with 3 fermenters. We've been really excited to work with the Hythe Hop Project for the past couple of years. The Hythe Hop Project's a really interesting community organisation where people will grow hops in their back garden. They'll grow them anywhere, they'll produce maybe a small amount, they'll produce a lot of hops. And then at the end of the season, pick the hops themselves and then bring them to a central point and put them all together to produce a really large hop harvest. And it's quite amazing to see that you may bring just like 50 grams or 100 grams. Some people may bring a lot more than that. But once put together, you end up with kilos and kilos of fresh hops. And they're really fresh. It's a really nice thing for the community because they've all worked together to contribute to make something together, and the end result is beer. So the process of brewing at Docker, because we're still quite small scale, it's still quite a manual process. We start by getting the grain and loading it into our grist case, and that goes into a vessel that's called a mash tun. And the mash tun has a false bottom with lots of holes in the bottom. And then we heat up our water, and then we mix the grain together with the water at exactly the right temperature to kind of form a sort of porridge mix. And after it's sat there for just over an hour, we then start to take the liquid off that has come out of the grain because of mixing with the water. So almost like sieving that mixture, and we take that liquid and we send it over into the kettle, which is just a giant vessel for boiling liquid. We then sparge the grain that's left in the mash tun, which means you give it a shower with more warm water to wash all of the sugar and enzymes from the grain to collect just enough for the brew, which is around 1,600 litres. Meanwhile, the kettle's turned on, the elements fire up, and they start heating up the wort, which is the beer in the unfermented state, so a sugary, delicious liquid that gets heated up and boiled. Once it's boiled, you get loads of foam on the top as all the proteins are boiled out of the beer to make a really kind of thick foam on the top that breaks up, starts to break up into clumps and drop out the liquid. It's at that point that we start to put hops in. So the first lot of hops that go in are for bittering, so they give the beer the bitter flavour. And the reason you get that out of the hops is because they will be boiled for the longest, which means that a lot of the essential oils from them dissipate and leave just a bitterness behind. As the boil proceeds, start to add hops that maybe have more aroma, and because they will be in the boil for less time, more of the essential oils will stay in there and they'll start to contribute to the aroma and taste of the finished beer. Once the boil is finished, which is about an hour in length, we then add some more hops. For the boil, we don't use pellets, we use the actual hop flowers. They're dropped in and they will just steep in the worts. They won't be boiled. So more of the essential oils and aroma will come out of them. And then as the wort starts to cool down, we add a final amount of hops, they give the most aroma and flavour. After which, we want to cool down the beer as quickly as possible. We use a heat exchanger to quickly crash down that temperature to 20 degrees. It's pumped into the clean fermenter, and once that's full, we add in the yeast. So pitching the yeast into the top of the fermenter, you want to have an environment that's really good for that yeast. So it needs to be a good temperature, maybe 20 to 23 degrees. And you pitch enough yeast that it can start acting on the wort as quickly as possible. The hops that we've put in also contribute towards that, because hops are antibacterial. So the hops will prevent the beer from getting infected. Hops are one of the reasons why beer keeps so well and keeps so long, combined with the alcohol, and that if you've got it in a sealed vessel, it should keep for a long time. So the process of fermentation begins, and that process is the yeast cells eating the sugar that's in the wort and creating the byproducts of carbon dioxide and alcohol. We maintain a steady temperature to make sure that they don't get too enthusiastic and they do their job, but without creating off flavours. They don't get stressed, and they will multiply and multiply. So where we would add maybe a kilo of yeast, we'll get like maybe 10 kilos of yeast produced over the period of fermentation. And that process will continue for maybe 3 days, maybe a little bit longer. Once we know that the beer is finished fermenting, which means that the yeast have eaten all the sugar that they're going to eat, we then know that fermentation's finished, and we'll add some more hops. And that stage of hopping is called dry hopping. In our fermenters we use pellet hops for that, which are kind of hop flowers that have been, lupulin has been taken out, extracted by removing a lot of the vegetative matter that is part of the hop flower. So you get a kind of a more intense hit of hops in like a small pellet. So we'll typically add between 2 and 15 kilos of those pellets into the fermenter. They will then do their magic and release lots of essential oils into the beer. There'll be certain elements of transformation that will occur that will produce flavours that you wouldn't really expect to get from this starting point. That's kind of the magic of the hops, is that they start as one thing, but when combined with alcohol and the wort, then the beer in that fermenter, they will start to develop all kinds of interesting flavours. Once that's been done, then transfer it to another vessel if we're going to carbonate the beer. So we've got a tank that we use for canning. We'll transfer some into that. We'll introduce carbon dioxide back into the beer to get it to the right level of fizziness. Typically our beers are around 2.4 volumes carbonation, which means they're kind of similar to a lager in the amount of carbonation. They'll feel quite fizzy on the tongue. And then that will either be put into keg or to can. But now we've just started doing cask beer, which means that before that process happens, we'll take off some of the beer while it's in a totally flat state, put it into cask with some sugar, and the yeast that still remains in that will act upon that sugar that's introduced to create just the right level of carbonation for kind of a real ale. Our real ale that we're interested in making is quite hop forward, so again it might have an element of cloudiness to it, but again it's just sort of good oils that creates that, and that's what maintains the flavour in the beer. Once we've packaged all the beer, then we'll deliver it ourselves to customers in the local area, to shops, restaurants, pubs, and then people can enjoy it.